Hello and welcome to Behind the Badge. I'm Chief Edward Dunn and thank you for joining us today. I have a guest with me today and we're talking about a really important issue is domestic violence. And my guest today is our civilian domestic violence advocate in the police department, Carmen Espinoza. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is a topic that is still pretty hot in society and it's not often spoken about.
It does still have a lot of embarrassment and shame related to it, and fear.
Yeah, I think the fear factor, right? And you're right, and the embarrassment. People don't want to know what's going on behind closed doors. And we want people to come forward when there is domestic violence.
Yes.
And a lot of times people don't really understand what domestic violence is. And we're fortunate here in the Falmouth Police Department. We've had this program in effect, I think, since like 2007. You've been around since 2008. And it may even been before that, somewhere around 2005, when we had different domestic violence. But you were hired in 2008, and you've been with us, what, 10 years?
10 years.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And you've done a great job. And I see it as the chief, and I saw it as the captain when I was in charge of that whole division and everything. How important it is to have a civilian domestic violence advocate. And what the community may not understand is, you don't respond to the domestics themselves. It's the police officers. We respond, we get the call for the domestic. Our officers will go and handle the domestic as far as if they have to make an arrest, if they have to get an emergency order. Then it gets kind of like turned over to you.
Yes.
Can you just talk about a little bit what the civilian domestic violence advocate's all about?
Well, my position is to reach out to victims of domestic violence and see what resources and assistance we can provide. Sometimes that also involves providing resources for the families of these victims. It's not always just the victim that's being traumatized. There's children, there's parents. We've had incidences at places of business where we've had assaults and the co-workers were affected and traumatized. So we're reaching out and providing any kind of service that they might benefit from. There's also the after effect of getting out of a domestic violent relationship and the resources to help those families that are now struggling because they've made a choice, a very difficult one, and sometimes frightening one, to leave an abusive relationship. So resources for the kids, help with food stamps, housing, clothes, transportation, anything like that, and we can help them find a place that will assist them with that.
Yeah, that's good. And you are that person that follows up on those pieces for the police department. You've even gone to court with victims, I believe, too, haven't you?
I go to provide support. We're not allowed to speak in court, but it's comforting for someone to be there that's not judging them, that's not telling them not to do it. And support is the biggest thing. Victims often get support for a short while when they're in an abusive relationship, and then people tend to turn away. Family gets frustrated, they get tired, and they give up. And I think the biggest part of my job is to not give up, even when victims get back into these kinds of relationships. We are always there. Our officers always treat them with respect, regardless of the situation surrounding their abusive relationship.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we're really not there to judge them or judge the situation. We're just there to make sure they're safe and make sure that the services are available to them. And we do a good job. All our officers are trained. They get trained in the academy. There's ongoing training. You even train our officers to bring them up to date.
I do. Whenever we have a new officer, usually 2 or 3 at a time, we'll have a 3 or 4 hour little session where we go through the dynamics of domestic violence just to refresh their memories about these things and to help them understand what's going on in the town of Falmouth. We have certain things that are happening that they should be aware of, and it helps them handle the calls better to be prepared. So the interaction between me and the officers is real important because they tell me things I won't know because I'm not going to these people's homes, and vice versa. These victims are telling me things that will help them to make a better case if they're following through with charges, which is, again, a choice that we don't force. But if they want to, we all work together to make the best scenario possible for these victims.
And it's all about keeping them safe, keeping their children
Right.
safe, and making sure that everything is in place. I mean, we talked about briefly in the beginning, some of the stigmas that go around with why people. I mean, you've dealt with some cases. I know you have, because we've talked about it. That people have been in an abusive relationship for years and,
Oh, yeah.
and haven't come forward. I mean, some of those. If you can just maybe tell the public some of those things. I know it's a stigma. Some of it's financial too, right?
It's mostly financial, but a lot of it is 20, 30 years of marriage. You really don't know how to live without your partner, as in most relationships. And that gets really difficult and frightening for a person in their 40s and 50s, maybe even 60s and 70s, to think, wow, I'm going to not be in this home with this person anymore. How am I going to get things done? It's more frightening than realistic. Anybody can move out and, make a life for themselves, but the fear of being alone, the fear of not having an income, the fear of not knowing how you're going to live or where you're going to live. Homelessness is a real issue for some of our victims, and so they choose to stay. And understanding that helps you work with them better. You can't beat them down because they're not doing what you think is the right thing.
Right.
So we don't do that. We're just there, regardless of their choices.
And if they do decide to leave, what services are available to them? Are there, places they can go, or is it something that you can help them with?
Yes. In our more severe cases where safety is paramount, we have shelters all over the state. The first step is to use SafeLink, which is a site that has all shelters in the state of Massachusetts on a list with updates throughout the day that tell you how many beds are available or not.
Right.
Often they're very full, but we keep that resource available so we can find out. There are other options. There's safe homing sometimes in different areas. Some agencies will help out with hotels for the weekend. These are all funded through different grants, and it's hard. There's not a lot of money, but getting them safe is our first priority, and then setting them up with the services. Services include counseling for them and their children, counseling for their families. Parents, grandparents who may have seen this abuse but couldn't do anything about it, and we just include anyone who's in need.
Because domestic violence really does affect the entire family unit.
It does. It affects the neighborhood. It affects the workplace. It affects the schools these kids go to. Often victims will get a restraining order, which is an order to protect the victim and her children from the abuser. She's got to go and give it to the school. She's got to go and give it to the daycare. She's got to go and give it to her job. If she's got, people taking care of her kids, those families need to know about these things. And this is the hard part for victims, is to talk about it so widely. But the more they talk about it, the more they feel empowered, and they feel they did the right thing. Ultimately, prosecution is the ideal, but many of them will not go through with that. You prosecute someone for domestic violence, he might lose his job.
Right.
Military, they lose their gun until it's resolved. That can go up to a year. That's income for those children. And it's a nice idea to think you're going to get it because the court says, we order this child support, we order this alimony or spousal support. It doesn't always make them do it. And the reality is we often have to set them up at food banks. We have to set them up at the thrift stores and to help them feed and clothe their children because the abuser is not following the orders of the court.
Right.
That's a really big issue. But there's lots of resources out there, a lot of people that help.
Yeah, and you talk about resources. I mean, like I said, you work for the Falmouth Police Department with the partnership with Independence House.
Yes.
Maybe talk a little bit about that, because you work at both places.
I do. 3 years ago, I started doing counseling at Independence House 2 days a week. So often I'm talking with a victim Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday at the police department and setting her up for an intake and counseling for Thursday and Friday. We found that smooth transition helps them to not feel they're doing something with a stranger, and
Makes sense.
they hear more about it from the police department. The officers refer to Independence House. I refer to Independence House. So it's kind of like a link, and that has really been beneficial. A lot of victims have started signing up that before wouldn't do it.
Yeah. Maybe we could just tell the community a little bit about what Independence House is. I mean,
Okay, Independence House is a private nonprofit organization established in 1979 to serve the needs of domestic violence and their children. In 1981, Independence House increased victim services with a rape crisis center, providing crisis intervention and specialized assistance to serve victims of sexual assault ages 12 and up. Each program is staffed by a trained full-time or part-time counselor that meets the statutory requirements of the Massachusetts General Laws, MGL Chapter 233, and are available to assist survivors in assessing community resources and provide support. What that boils down to is we do counseling for a lot of people. We have secondary victims, we have homicide victims, we have the teachers, the nurses that work on these. They're all secondary victims. They can be a worker at a hospital, it can be your sister of the victim, but we provide support and services for anybody who is affected by domestic and sexual assault. The programs include children who witness violence, safe and sound groups, housing stabilization where they have somebody that processes clients who might be eligible for housing in one of their safe houses. They do prevention, education, and outreach, abuse in later life, which affects Falmouth, because we have an elderly population that's pretty high. And we see a lot of elders with grown children who can become abusive due to drugs and alcohol, unemployment, lack of. Our elders really struggle making those choices because this is putting a 40-year-old son in the street or letting him stay there and be abusive to you and your home and maybe your pets. So we work with them to let them know there are other options. He doesn't have to go to jail. Maybe he can just go live somewhere else and we can get an order of protection or a no trespass order.
Get some counseling going and things like that.
Just things that don't put her son or daughter in jail, but make her safe, because the elderly are at a high risk for injury because of their elder age. And the two-story homes that often these people have, it's a very scary thought to think somebody's yelling and screaming and slamming doors and there's an 80-year-old woman who's using a walker to get around the house. So our elders are definitely a concern, and I work through the police department closely with Elder Services here in Falmouth.
In Independence House, there is an Independence House office here in Falmouth, and their main office is in Hyannis?
They have their main office in Hyannis. 3 years ago, maybe 4 now, they opened an office in Falmouth with a staff, a conference room, meeting rooms. 3 of us work there at any given day of the week. And then we have an office in Orleans and one in Provincetown.
And can people just walk in to these places?
Anybody can walk in. There's always somebody on staff that can assist them to do an intake or just do some crisis intervention or to direct them towards resources that they might be looking for.
Wonderful. And I know there's an 800 number, and we'll talk about that at the end. We'll give that to the community, to the members, so that, if you do have or know somebody that's in domestic violence, they can always call that 24 hours a day, correct?
Right.
Yeah. And we also, we really do request that, if there's the domestic violence or you believe somebody is in domestic violence, it's okay to call the police department.
Yes.
And let our officers respond and find out what's going on. I mean, that's really important.
Because, and people don't need to know you're the one who called. I think
Absolutely.
that's important.
That's important.
You don't know what's going on behind the closed doors, and you don't know if all that screaming's just the normal way of relating, or if there's a little child in the corner being screamed at like that. These are the things we don't know. So calling the police allows somebody to get in there and see and make that determination. And we don't relay who called. We
No.
don't, it's confidential.
Yeah, that's really
That's the other-
important to let people know that, even in the public log, people's names aren't in the public log for domestic violence. If we respond there, that information is not given out.
Right.
So we do protect the victims and things like that. So that's
And
important.
confidentiality is real important in my job for safety reasons. So people call me or come in and they tell me stories. I'm not a cop per se, so I can't run out and arrest somebody
Right.
because they tell me their boyfriend did this. That has opened the door to the community to come in and ask questions, to get advice, and over the years, those numbers have increased. Call-ins and walk-ins.
Yeah, let's talk about those numbers a little bit if you have some numbers. I mean, is domestic violence on the rise? I mean, 'cause again, domestic violence, like we said, we've had domestic violence advocates in the police department since 2005, 2006, somewhere around there. And law enforcement, the laws have changed over the years to give law enforcement more power to protect the victims. You would think at this point in time it would be decreasing, but I don't think it is.
I don't know if it's decreasing or increasing so much because our numbers come from actual people coming in, making a call, walking through the door. I think domestic violence is just being reported more.
Right.
When I started, the numbers were in the 2s and 300s for the whole year. In 2016, through the whole year, we had 432 domestic disturbance calls.
Wow.
Last year, we had 507.
Okay.
And then this year, up until today,
Mm-hmm.
we've had 241.
Wow.
Now, that's a lot of calls, but that's because they know someone's going to answer their questions. Before, they would get dispatched and get transferred to an officer, and an officer's, got 14 other calls on his list. They weren't specific to this crime. Police officers deal with all crimes, so domestic violence is just one of many. I think over the years, I have even heard victims tell me, "Oh, I gave your number to my friend," or "Oh, I got your number from my coworker," or "Oh, my boss told me to give you guys a call." I think the word of mouth has helped that people aren't afraid to come in and ask questions anymore. Where before, if they talked to one of your officers and said, "Oh, Joe did this," and they know Joe's last name, they're going to be mandated by law to arrest him.
Right.
I'm not like that now. I definitely follow the rules of if an elder, a child, or an animal is in danger, I will report and I let them know that right away. But most of them are just looking for advice and guidance.
Right.
A lot of parents come in and ask about their children and what to do. Grandparents nowadays got a lot of custody of kids.
Right.
They've had a lot of incidences that were involved with the caretakers are not the parents. They're foster parents or grandparents. And so they really don't know what to do. And I think the open door, open phone policy has been the biggest help to our community because they're always getting their answers.
Yeah, and that's really important. As you said, officers, compared to what you do and what police officers do, we're mandated by law.
Right.
That, if we show up at a domestic violence and there's, it's been physical or anything, we're going to arrest, whether the victim wants the person arrested or not.
Right.
Our hands are tied. The law says you will arrest. And again, that's where it's changed over the years. Where years ago, you have someplace to go for the night, go and work it out tomorrow and all that. But the laws that are in effect now really do keep families and victims safe.
Well, and the flip side of that is that a lot of these women don't want them arrested. So, they can talk to me and I'm not going to go arrest him.
Right.
I'm going to give them, an avenue that may work, it may
Set a
not,
plan
but
in
at
place.
least it's an option before the last straw to them. A lot of victims believe arrest is the end of the road.
Right.
And we respect that.
Yeah.
Our officers often get women and men on the street at calls that ask them, I want to talk with your advocate, or can I get her direct line? And I think that's why, because they want to tell me first before they follow through.
Right. Yeah, they really want to see what plans are in place, what will benefit them. And you're right. I mean, if their husband or their boyfriend or whomever, if they are supporting them and everything else, and now they don't have that person anymore, you're right. It affects them and their whole family. So it's,
The economy has always been a reason, as far back as I've been doing this,
Yeah.
way too long. But I think it's gotten worse, and I have actually worked with women who the ex lives in the basement, and they live upstairs, or vice versa, and it takes a lot of, I guess, diligence to do that,
Yeah,
to do it
yeah.
well for the sake of the kids.
Right.
And so I really reach out to them and support them and help them because they're trying. Even though they can't be married or together as a couple, they're trying to do what's best for the kids.
for
And
the
I
kids.
think that's always, regardless of how severe the cases are, even the abusers, they're all concerned for their kids. They just may do it differently than somebody who's not an abuser. But I do believe the kids make them want to do better. And that's what we reach out and try to do, is let them know we can help them do it better than what's going on right now.
Well, yeah. There are different levels of domestic violence too.
Yes.
Wouldn't you say?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. From the, like you talk about the yelling and screaming to strangulation and everything else.
Yes. There's a level of lethality in some of these cases that is very real to those victims, which lethality means they could definitely be killed in the next incident with this abuser. Strangulation is a very personal thing, and it can cause a lot of health problems and health concerns after the fact. So when we see a case like that, where there's very, very severe abuse, we have something called the High Risk Task Force here on Cape Cod and the islands, created to work specifically with cases that are high lethality. We want to get the DA, the probation, the DCF if there's kids involved, housing if there's housing involved. We want everyone involved that works with this family, from the school counselor to his probation officer to her primary physician. It's important to get them all together so everyone can hear what they heard and then put it all together and see where a crime was committed. It's not against the law to yell at your wife. It's against the law to do it for 7 hours.
Right.
Well, it's really not, but these
it's
are the pictures these
not healthy.
workers need to see so they can make judgments on what kind of charges, what kind of follow through for those charges, meaning is it going to be on an anklet, is it going to be lockup, is it going to be probation? And the whole point is to keep them safe because his or the abuser's abuse is deadly. And children and parents or mothers often get killed in these things. So say that happens in Falmouth for one of my victims. I'm going to call the Michael O'Keefe's office.
Oh, the district attorney's office.
District attorney's office, and say we have a high-risk case. I want to pass this on to your district attorney that's working these. And then he collects everybody. He emails everyone involved. We meet at a certain time and place, and then we discuss it. I have seen a high-risk task meeting end up with 17 charges that were not there the day before.
Wow.
They're a little here, a little there, a little this, but they all add up to where now we got a 2-year sentence behind him. And it's few and far between, but the ones we do, and it's all over the Cape, they're very, very violent people that need to be locked up.
And those are the ones that you see on the news, you know,
Yes.
things like that, where it may be a murder-suicide, things like that. So that's a great approach. It's a nice big team approach that, like you said, everybody's involved, so everybody gets to hear everything. And again, the bottom line is to keep the victim safe.
Yep. Independence House is a real big proponent of that. They're part of the creators of that whole program back with Lisa Edmonds, who is a judge somewhere now.
Correct.
They worked really hard to develop and identify how best to go about this, and I think it was a great invention, so to speak. We've helped so many victims be safe.
That's what it's all about, is keeping people safe.
Yep,
We have some our offices, when they go out, you do little packets too, right?
we do.
We can share that with our viewers.
The Falmouth Police Department Domestic Intervention Assistance Packet. Together we can stop the hurting. So what's in here are, of course, my business card, the domestic violence prosecution unit at the DA's office down in Barnstable. They are very involved with domestic violence cases, and they are very committed to helping. Why abuse victims stay? This is the big question every family member of a victim asks every day. Why do they go back? Why did she go back? There's a list of probably 50 reasons here, and everyone out there can make another list of 50 more. There's numerous reasons. Nobody can say it's not a right reason or it's not a wrong reason. These are personal choices based on personal beliefs and values. And we can't pick and choose and say, oh, she should not do that, so we're not going to help her.
Right.
Everyone gets help regardless of their reasons. Which one is this? Falmouth Human Services is a counseling office here in Falmouth that works with domestic violence victims who need therapy, which is more intense, personalized, long-term therapy for victims and their children. They work very closely with Independence House and with me. They're a big part of getting a domestic violence advocate as well as Independence House into the Falmouth Police Department way back.
Way back.
They're our champions. Independence House, which I kind of went over, but we put one of their brochures in which lists all the different programs that they do. And they are available at the hospitals when somebody gets taken in for a sexual assault. We have on-call staff. We have a 24-hour hotline that is manned by staff after hours. We also have a domestic violence shelter now, and now the shelter answers the hotline. But for years, people volunteered.
Right.
They did it after hours. It was a 24/7. It still is. They provide a lot of good services.
Great.
Safe plan. When you have a victim that's staying in a home with abuse, the important thing is to have a safety plan in place, meaning if you have to run, you have what you need. Birth certificate, driver's license, $20, extra house keys, baby food, whatever your life involves that's every day, nonstop. You want a bag of that packed. You want that put to the side somewhere, maybe hidden in the car. Extra keys, extra birth certificates. When a victim leaves an abuser, it is the most dangerous time. The violence will escalate. The fear will escalate because there's reason. It is one of the most dangerous times. So having something in place like an escape plan is real helpful. And when children are involved, we have to educate them too.
Right.
We bring them in, we discuss things, we tell them how they can help. We tell them how to be safe, but not to be a hero, because that's mom and dad's job to protect them. Safety planning goes on all the time.
Because we've gotten calls from children who's telling us that, you know, mommy and daddy are fighting.
Oh yeah. In today's world, children are much more proactive in helping out with this situation, where in the old days kids never spoke about it.
And they have their own cell phones and things like that. So we've had many of those incidents where they're hiding in another room and they call because they know there's something wrong.
Oh yeah, and we commend them for that.
Absolutely.
And we try to let them know that they were very brave and courageous. There is also a lot of programs with Independence House in our schools now. Mostly high schools, some middle schools. And they go in and it's about education. You know, what is abuse, what is not abuse, what is healthy relationships, what is, you know, the right way to talk to a woman, a girlfriend, a wife. Things like this to start young and educate them is real helpful. But because of that, I think is why we get so many calls from kids.
Right.
Because they know this is wrong. Where without the education that Independence House does, without that outreach, it's the same generational thing. Well, mom went through it, grandma went through it, I'm going to go through it. Okay, it's another day.
It's another day.
So Independence House is breaking that cycle,
That's
I think,
wonderful.
of children learning it's okay. And it's evident by how many kids do call police departments around the whole country.
Right. No, that's
It's
wonderful.
important. Oh, and the last thing is the power and control wheel. This is one of our diagrams that kind of explains what abuse is. physical violence, sexual violence, and it involves all these types of acts or activities, coercion and threats, economic abuse, intimidation, emotional abuse, isolation, minimizing, denying, and blaming, and using the children. Another big part of abuse is using the children. I'll take your children away. I have more money. I will get a better lawyer. I will get people to lie and say things about you that never happened. With these technology, you can actually do things that should look like somebody's done it off their
Absolutely.
phone and they never did it.
Right.
So that's a new area of challenge for law enforcement because technology has made it easier and more creative to be abusive. And the women, they know it. So we're really trying to jump on that bandwagon now and look at what technology is doing. I often hear, he said I sent him text messages, but I wasn't even in the state, you know. So these things are happening as anything else. There's always something new coming out that's going to assist abuse. So we're always trying to jump on that. And I think Independence House reaching out to the young kids puts a curb on that because they know, oh, well, that's not the right way to use my phone.
Right. No. Wealth of information. Yeah. You know, we're so fortunate, really are fortunate to have you in the police department. You know, for the last 10 years, you've done so much to assist the citizens of Falmouth as well as assist our officers, you know, in keeping people safe, and that's great. We're also very fortunate that we have Independence House here on Cape Cod to assist us beyond what you do and things like that. So this has been great. I think it's been very informative. I hope it's been very informative to our community. And there is an 800 hotline number, right? If we can maybe share that with them, the 800 number, because that is available 24 hours a day. If somebody wants to talk to, like you just said, a counselor or something like that, and not really sure what they want to do at that point in time, but just need to talk to somebody. The other option is if you're in a domestic violence situation that you are in fear of your safety, your children's safety, call the police department, dial 911, and we will send police officers there. But maybe we could share that 800 number.
800-439-6507. It's 24/7, and a trained counselor is always answering that because it's in the shelter, and there's always trained counselors at the shelter. The direct line to Independence House in Hyannis is 508-771-6507. And if it is after hours, that will automatically go into the hotline.
Okay.
Well, you have to press 1, and then it'll go into the hotline.
Follow the prompts.
Follow the prompts.
Okay, very good. Well, Carmen, I really appreciate you being on the show. I'm sure it was very informative. I learned some things again today, and that's important. And it's all about keeping victims of domestic violence safe. And I really appreciate what you do, both for the police department and for Independence House. Again, really important topic. It's one that's not going to go away anytime soon. I really do hope the community learned something today. And if you have any questions, you can always call the Falmouth Police Department and ask for Carmen, or you can call Independence House, as she said. So again, I am Chief Edward Dunn, and I thank you for viewing Behind the Badge. Thank you.
Thank you.